WBISLP 1069, Winterville, Ayden, Grifton, Southside, Greenville, North Carolina.
Motivations with Glenn.
Good day, everyone. This is Awesome Radio, 106.9 FM, WBISLP. You are tuned into the Glenn Johnson Show, Motivations with Glenn and Jacqueline Collins-Williams. Our topic of discussion today is remembering Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We already know that we have celebrated his birthday on Monday, January 16th. So that's his actual date of birth, actually. And so the nation celebrated his birthday on Monday, January 16th. So that's why our topic is today is remembering Dr. King. And I'm going to have my co-host, Ms. Jacqueline Collins, introduce herself at this time. And we'll begin with our first audio clip. Martin Luther King, If I Had Sneezed, because a lot of people are familiar with his I Have a Dream speech and so many other speeches and some of the accolades that he's known for. But few people know that he was almost killed prior to him being assassinated. And that's when he spoke about if I had sneezed. And you're going to hear why he said that in this audio clip. So Miss Jacqueline Collins-Williams, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, Dr. Glenn, Winterville, Greenville, and surrounding areas. It is good to be here today. I'm going to keep saying that. It's good to be here today, Dr. Glenn.
I know it is always good to be here.
And so we're excited. I am Jacqueline Collins-Williams, and we are talking on today, on this awesome day on Awesome Radio, and the Dr. Glenn Johnson's motivational show today. We're going to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King. And so I believe that this is such an awesome topic because the birthday was celebrated on yesterday. On Monday, many of us didn't have to go to school. Many of us didn't, a lot of people got it off work and they got paid holiday on that day. And so let's look at some things as to why we celebrate this great man. His achievements were phenomenal. And the change that he brought in the United States was just something that is just to be commended, it's to be remembered, and this holiday and birthday is worthy of a day.
Absolutely, and as I said, we all are accustomed or familiar with his I Have a Dream speech and so many other speeches, but few people know about the speech he gave where he says, if I had sneezed.
Yes.
And so that was prior to him being assassinated. And we have information on the woman that held the knife and attacked him and put the knife through his chest, which resulted in, well, let me just get to the audio tape, and then you'll hear what we're talking about.
Yes.
Let's go to the audio clip, ladies and gentlemen.
While sitting there autographing books, A demented black woman came up. The only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down writing, and I said, "Yes." The next minute, I felt something beating on my chest. Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon. That blade had gone through, and the x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And once that's punctured, you're drowned in your own blood. That's the end of you. It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. They allowed me to read some of the mail that came in, and from all over the states and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I will never forget. I had received one from the president and the vice president. I've forgotten what those telegrams said. I'd received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said. But there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl, who was a student at the White Plains High School. And I looked at that letter, and I'll never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." She said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze. I want to say tonight that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960. And students all over the South started sitting in at lunch hours. And I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream, and taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1962. The Negroes in Albany, Georgia, decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been here in 1963. Black people of Birmingham, Alabama, aroused the conscience of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I had had. If I had sneezed, I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was the audio clip on the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, "If I Had Sneezed." And he remembered the one letter that he received from the 9-year-old girl from White Plains High School, and that she wrote to him, and that she was thankful that he did not sneeze. Jackie.
Yes, Dr. Glenn, I think this is something that a lot of us didn't know about unless you studied Dr. Martin intently. And we're talking about the assassination attempt that happened actually before he was assassinated. I believe this was 10 years before or 10 years prior.
Yeah, that was 1958.
And a lot of people don't know that Dr. Martin was, that he survived an assassination attempt, because when I was studying this was my first time learning about it as well.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things I wanted to say, to that is that whenever you stand for change, or you stand to have things, to stand for justice and equality and righteousness, there will be people that are going to hate you. They're going to attack you. They are going to slander you. And some will even try to assassinate you. Yeah. And we know that Dr. King, he stood for change. He wanted to see the segregation ended in the South, and workers being treated well, And so those particular things were things that caused him to be the object of hate of many people.
Yeah, and
so,
he stood for everybody.
He stood so for everybody, but also more so too, for the black race that was being mistreated at that time. And so, and wanted everybody to be equal.
You will have 30 seconds to go before we go to the first break. I just want to briefly mention the name of the lady in his failed assassination attempt. Her name was Izola Curry Ware, American failed assassin. So that was her name, but we know he was ultimately assassinated by James Earl Ray. Ladies and gentlemen, keep it locked right here to Awesome Radio, the Glenn Johnson Show. We'll be back after this brief break. Stay tuned, 106.9 FM.
My name is Jayla, and you're to see to my papa, Glenn Johnson, on the radio.
Hi, my name is Minister Cooper. I listen to Awesome Radio every day, 106.9. Now you have a blessed day.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for keeping it tuned to the Glenn Johnson Show, Motivations with Glenn and Jacqueline Collins Williams. This is Awesome Radio, 106.9 FM, WBISLP, Winterville, Ayden, Grifton, Southside, Greenville, North Carolina. To God be the glory. We were discussing Reverend Dr. King's first assassination attempt by Izola Ware Curry. She was the American failed assassin that attempted to take the Reverend Dr. King's life in 1958. Jackie.
Yes, and so that's where the speech came from, if I had sneezed. Dr. King said if he had even sneezed, he would be dead. Yeah. That knife came so close, or letter opener, he was doing a signing at a book signing, and she came up, and he thought she was one of the fans that wanted to be signed or her book signed, or, and so he was just doing and going about what he does for his first book. And she came up, and she stabbed him in the chest. And a lot of people don't know that this happened, that this assassination attempt happened to Dr. King. In her story, it says here that she hated the NAACP, I believe, and those that operated and worked with civil rights. And so she got the chance to come up and came up close to him while he was doing the book signing, and she tried to plunge a knife into his chest. So it says here that particularly she hated the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. And so she really hated it's like her mind began to have delusions about them. And that's one of the things that when you're out in the public, you don't know who it is whose mind is going in the opposite direction.
That's
You could
right.
be doing good. You be doing good every year, every month, whatever. And somebody else's mind is messed up, and somebody else's mind is on the wrong thing. And we see this with this particular lady. She was later diagnosed, I believe, as being schizophrenic.
Yeah, paranoid schizophrenic.
And they said not only did she have a letter opener, but she had a gun in her bra at that time when they got her and arrested her.
Yeah.
And they did convict her. But she, it's something to see how she hated him. And Dr. King had to do a testimony in front of the grand jury that indicted her for that attempted murder. The psychiatrist, they helped her, with her diagnosis there. But she was still convicted of this particular crime. And so, it's dangerous. Anybody that stands for change, you can be a target of something. And Dr. King saw this even before his assassination, that he had this assassination attempt. So he had to know he had security and people around him. Right. I'm sure that he changed the way he did things. But in his speech, he talked about that he no longer feared death. He didn't fear death anymore because he came so close to it at that particular time. I'm sure that it changes you when you go through something like that, Dr. Glenn.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And this whole thing was tragic in and of itself, but he did not die from the failed attempt, of course. That's why after that, and when it mentions her name, that's why it mentions, see also James Earl Ray, who assassinated King. So he was the assassin of assassinating Dr. King. And believe it or not, during his hearing, the late great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's wife, the late great Coretta Scott King, even spoke at his hearing and gave testimony. And we'll get to that in a minute. But we'll go just talk a little bit about more James Earl Ray.
And so, Dr. Glenn, let me just correct that. She was not convicted of that. She ended up in the mental institution because of it. So they said that she was incapable of understanding the charges that were against her. So she did not do time in that way. She was sent to a mental institution, and then she later was sent to a nursing home where she died in the nursing home of natural causes. So she was not convicted like in a court of law, but she was charged with it.
Right. And she died in New York City, I believe, right?
Right. So she was indicted on it, but she couldn't stand because of her mental capability or incapability at that time. And so, this is a great speech. For those of you that have the time, go and listen to it. If I had sneezed, we hear the other ones, but we don't hear that much about that one.
Exactly. That's why I figured I'd bring this one today. And we'll play this one for the listening audience here, because not everybody is familiar of this particular speech. And also, we're having this program today because although Dr. King's was celebrated on Monday, this is a remembrance of the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And it's a celebration for everybody, all races, all ethnic groups, not just Black people or African American, but for everybody. And if we can get 4 minutes in before we go to the next break on James Earl Ray, we can pick back up when we come back, because I do want to mention a part on the last page of that document where Coretta Scott King said at the jury that convicted him, our commentary on what she told the jury. Jackie.
One moment, Dr. Glenn. I'm trying to find my paper.
There
it is. I see it.
Got it.
This one. Yeah, so we know that James Earl Ray was the one that was convicted of the murder. Although there are other conspiracy theories that believe that it was an inside job. They believe that people that were with him did that were a part of the assassination. There's a lot of things that people believe.
Yeah.
But we have here the conviction.
And in that document, it does mention the different conspiracies concerning that, and some can still rise to government involvement and the mafia.
Yeah, so it says on April 4th, 1968, Ray killed civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. in a single shot fired from his Remington rifle, where King was standing on the second floor balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Shortly after the shot was fired, witnesses saw Ray fleeing from a rooming house across the street from the motel where he had been renting a room. A package was abandoned close to the site that included a rifle and binoculars, both found with Ray's fingerprints. Now, they said that as another piece of evidence, when I was reading and studying some of the things, that they had found a map with Dr. King's his house circled on it.
Yeah, that's right.
And some other things, evidence that also led them to believe that he was the killer.
He was.
Even though other people believe, that it was an inside job.
Yeah.
And that it was orchestrated by those that were with him. Kind of sounds like our Savior. The betrayal of our Savior when it was an inside job. Yeah. When he was betrayed by his own people, crucify him, they said. And so, it's not very hard to believe that betrayal can happen from inside and that it could be an inside job. So, but here we have where he was convicted from it. They look at here, it said that when he tried to flee, the airport officials noticed that Ray carried another passport from under a second name. So he had a lot of things that looked like it added up that he was the one that was guilty. He had a second passport. Yeah. And so, he had a lot of things that were planned for his escape so he could get out of it. And he could get away.
Yeah, he had a lot going on.
Yeah, there was a lot of evidence against him.
But ultimately, he was captured at an airport in the United Kingdom.
Oh, yes. And so we wanted to look at what Coretta Scott King said, Dr. Glenn. Is that what you said?
Yes, but we have 40 seconds. We'll pick back up on it after we come for the break. Then we'll move into the other documents because then we'll have about 30 minutes remaining for today's broadcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Glenn Johnson Show, Motivation with Glenn and Jacqueline Collins Williams. We're having our topic of discussion today on remembering Dr. King, but we have to go to our second break momentarily. But I do advise everybody to stick and stay. There's a lot more to learn. This is informative and educational. And remember the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. So, ladies and gentlemen, stick and stay. This is Awesome Radio, 106.9 FM, WBISLP. Back in a moment.
We are the station that provides inspiration for the family and ministry teaching for practical Christian living. On radio.
For more tips, go to danagresh.com.
We're back. You're listening to The Glenn Johnson Show. You can reach Glenn at glennjohnsonshow@gmail.com.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen. You're tuned back into The Glenn Johnson Show, Motivations with Glenn and Jacqueline Collins Williams. I'm glad you stuck and stayed with us. We have a lot more to share with you as we remember the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Jackie.
Yes. So not only are there others that believe that James Earl Ray didn't do it, but Dr. King's family also believed. And so Coretta Scott King said that the jury was clearly convinced by the extensive evidence that was presented during the trial that in addition to Mr. Jowers, the conspiracy of the mafia, local, state, and federal government agencies were deeply involved in the assassination of my husband. So she believed that it was just more than what they were showing, that it was a deeper assassination, that were more involved in it. The jury also affirmed overwhelming evidence that identified someone else and not James Earl Ray as the shooter, and that Mr. Ray was set up to take the blame. So there's many people that believe that he didn't do it, including Dr. King's family.
And just let me point out, ladies and gentlemen, what Ms. Jacqueline Collins-Williams just read was an absolute quote from the late, great Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's beloved wife. So that was a quote from her, end quote.
Direct quote from her. So she believed that the government and other people wanted to get rid of him because he was stirring up so much and causing so much, and people to revolt against the injustices that were happening at that time.
Yeah, because you see, when things like that happen, that's how people think. That's our government for you. They'll think like that, well, this man got a lot of power. A lot of people are following him. So we better take extra precautions for him because now they're afraid of him and what he might be able to produce.
Yes, but he was nonviolent. His message was nonviolence. And so, but still, when you cause change and you cause people to gather together against a thing, people become afraid of you. They become afraid of what you could do. They become afraid of your power. And he had a lot of people that were following him. He had a lot of people that were marching. They were marching on Washington. They were doing a lot of things and sit-ins and different things to cause change. And there was a lot of publicity surrounding him and the things that he upheld. But he was a nonviolent. He was an advocate of nonviolence. Right. We've all seen if nothing else, in movies and different things and documentations of what happened, documentaries of what happened at that time. And we've seen, a lot of violence and things that were happening towards people, dogs and water hoses and people being attacked. And to have a nonviolent theme, to have a nonviolent motto, and to not retaliate was a great power and great peace. And Dr. King was an advocate of that.
And let me just mention two things on that. All right. You spoke about how prominent Dr. King was organizing, getting people together. And I said the same thing about the Million Man March that occurred in the United States. I don't know to this day who organized it, but I said they wasn't worried about the million men that showed up in Washington, D.C. They was more concerned about who organized it and how did this individual get a million people to show up in one spot at one time, which was Washington, D.C. So that's where they're concerned. If you are capable of getting that many people together, believe me, the government is going to have eyes on you. The other thing I want to mention about that, you spoke of Dr. King being nonviolent. His movement, his cause stood for nonviolence. But I don't care where you go in the United States, and comedians make junk of this all the time. They say, well, I don't care where you go in the United States. If there's anything that says Martin Luther King, if it could be a street or a school, you can believe there's some violence going on. So that what they're doing is singling out one particular area. But I actually find that not to be true. Not every street, not every school that bears the name Martin Luther King is violent. I don't believe that at all. This is why I appeared at Winterville town hall meeting one year when they were renaming one of the streets to Martin Luther King Way or Drive or something. I said, what would be a nice thing? And I told them about the comedian's jokes or naming things with Martin Luther King. I told them about that. I said, it would be nice if you would name a street or location that has nothing to do with violence at all. Okay, Jackie.
So we also see here that Dr. King was the orchestrator of a lot of things. We also see that he stood for the civil rights. He helped to get the Civil Rights Act of 1964, prohibits discrimination on the basis of color, religion, sex, and national origin.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that he helped to facilitate that were even brought to pass after his death, and a lot of things that were there. And so he stood against the civil rights movement was a battle against unjust Jim Crow laws and that marginalized Black Americans. And so there was a lot of unfair things that he stood against at that time, segregation and things being segregated, and the laws that kept Black people, as it said, marginalized here, the things that were unfair, the injustices, and so the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he helped to bring that about. It says here, the leadership of the civil rights icons from Dr. Martin Luther King to the Little Rock Nine to bring the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to fruition. Now, a lot of these things, Dr. Glenn, are before my time. And they're before some of our times, but we need to remember these things, and we need to look at where we've come from. We need to see the sacrifice that was given by those that came before us, and Dr. Martin Luther King was a spearhead of these things.
Well, you said it was before your time, but I do remember some things about this era, because when Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, I was 8 years old, and I recall watching his funeral or being televised. Of course, we had to watch it on black and white TV. It wasn't color TV at the time. So I remember watching it in my living room with my mom, my aunt, and my grandpa, because my grandpa was a minister. So he was very fond of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And of course, my grandmother. So we was all sitting there watching it. Of course, they knew what was going on because they were older adults. Here I am, 8 years old, wondering what in the world is going on. What are y'all talking about? What are we watching? But I do recall that specifically, and that's so vague in my mind.
Definitely. I was born in 1969. He was already done by the time I was born. So, yeah. And he was assassinated, I believe, in 68. So he was already, before I was born, it had already happened. But thank God for the things that went on before us, because those are the things that shaped us for now.
That's right. And do you really realize what you don't know? Because I'm just telling you, I actually have a photograph of Dr. King when they had allowed cameras in the sanctuary of the church with him laying in the casket. I actually have a photo of that.
Wow, my goodness, that is an awesome memento.
Yeah, and I also have a photo where he was on a how they have the what they call it, I can't think of the name, but the catapult, not the catapults. Anyway, they have a horse-drawn carriage. They had a mule, just a horse-drawn mule, and his casket was on the I can't think of the word for some reason. Anyway, he was being his casket was being drawn by a mule. I have an image of that also.
He should have had a presidential, funeral or type of thing, because he was such a great man.
And we do have a calling in. Okay, we missed that call. Wait a minute. Caller, you're live on the air on the Glenn Johnson Show. You have a call, comment, or question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I just wanted to say that you guys had a great show today. I appreciate it. I've been listening to it. And I love your guys' enthusiasm about it. It's like you're bringing the subject, you're bringing Dr. King alive. And thank you for making that disclaimer that all violent streets don't have to be associated with Martin Luther King. That's just something that we started in our heads.
That's right.
So that's a little self-hate right there.
That's right.
So I just wanted to say thank you guys, and young lady's doing a great job. And a lot of this is before all of our time, but certain things are still manifesting themselves from decisions that were made.
Caller, we got to go out to break. Call us. Hold on, we got to go to break.
Yep.
106.9 FM.
Keep it locked right here to the Glenn Johnson Show.
To us, a child is born. Find it today at mimradio.org.
This is Awesome Radio.
Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Glenn Johnson Show. Motivation with Glenn and Jacqueline Collins Williams. We're not going to prolong anything because I believe we still have a caller on the line. Caller, are you still there?
I am.
Great. You have anything further to say, sir?
I was basically just saying that things have a way of connecting themselves to history. I was born in 1968, and I believe that's the year he was assassinated. I was born in October. I don't know the month he was assassinated, but just think of the stress that my mom was under carrying me during that time. And so we all have a link to our past. And it is always a chance for us to open the door and make it better for our future. So I just want to say thank you, guys. And, hey, keep up the good work, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, thank you, Coach Garrison.
All right now.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned the part about the disclaimer about not everybody seems to think that wherever there's a building or a street named after Dr. King, there's some violence going on. Because I don't believe that at all. I want to thank you for pointing that out once again. If you want to share it with us one more time, I will allow you to do so at this time.
I think that there's violent streets on every street name across the nation. And so just because one or two streets have some violence, that doesn't mean that all of them do. But somehow we're subliminally taught to hate ourselves. And so when we see good things, we got to break somebody down to our level somehow and make a joke about it, and that's what happened. So,
thank you. Yeah.
Other than that, I'm sure you're safe on most of America's Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, and King Drive. You know, you're going to be just fine.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And we have about 18 minutes or 17 minutes rather for the remainder of the broadcast today. So, to call, I want to thank you for calling in. I'm going to give it right back over to my co-host, Ms. Jacqueline Collins Williams.
Definitely. And just like the caller said, I have heard those things, that usually the Dr. Martin Luther King streets are going to also go through black neighborhoods.
Yeah.
But at least lest we forget, we need those names out there, and we need to remember what has happened in our past so we can strengthen our future. And, you know, just like the caller said, the fight is not over. There's still injustices and things that are happening that we're seeing even in our days and our time that we need to speak up about.
Yeah, and I don't think, I think it's getting more broader now. They're just not going through black neighborhoods. Dr. Martin Luther King Street, drive away, or Dr. Martin Luther King High School or elementary school or middle school. Now they're going into other areas that has no racial ethnicity at all. I know one particular place, and I hate to mention this, but I'll mention it anyway. In Philadelphia, it's not in no particular neighborhood at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's alongside of a waterway, and that's Martin Luther King Drive. And I prefer that because it's not associated with any race.
Well, you're going to find one almost in every city. You're going to find a Dr. Martin Luther King Drive somewhere.
That's right.
And that's so awesome to see that name as a street all over the United States. I mean, every place you go, you see a Dr. Martin Luther King Drive.
That's right. And perhaps a school or some type of building. So, yes.
Definitely. I was in Detroit, and my junior high school was named Dr. Martin Luther King. And so I was honored to have that. I went to junior high that was named Dr. Martin Luther King.
And let me ask you a question. Was it a violent school?
Was it a violent school? Every school is violent. I've worked in school and with children for a long time, and every place that is dealing with school, at some point you're going to have something.
Yeah.
Was it violent crimes? No, but kids, they're going to get into some scuffles and some things no matter where they are and no matter what color. Kids are going to be kids. So not necessarily violent in that particular area. Kids are kids. Was there mischievousness going on? Yes. And that happens everywhere with kids because that's the nature of children.
And I know a lot of people get confused. That's why we have shows like this to, bring to your attention to real information. Because I remember a guy said, hey, I like that guy that you guys represent. What's his name? Martin Luther Vandross. I said, not Luther Vandross. We're talking about Martin Luther King, not Luther Vandross.
Oh yes, Dr. King, Dr. Glenn, and we keep saying Dr. King and Dr. Glenn. So now, Dr. Glenn, do you know one of the things I admire about Dr. King, and this is just personally, and this is off the script and off the paper. One of the things that I say, and when I speak about Dr. King, is that a lot of times people forget that he was a preacher. Right. He was a minister first too in the church.
Yeah, right.
But I also call him America's prophet.
That's right.
Because he's one of the prophets that I could see from way back when that had a dream and his words came into manifestation. I call him a prophet.
And I'll mention one more thing. For the longest time, through my young adult years, when I still lived at home, and my friends would come over my house, they'll come into my bedroom, we'll sit down and talk for a while. And they always told me, they say, hey, can you ask us one thing? I said, yeah, what is it? How come every time we come over here, you just got one single picture of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King on your wall? No picture of no girls or nothing else, just Martin Luther King. I said, because I grew up in that era, I understand it, and I know what he stood for. That's why that soul picture was always in my room until I moved from home.
We have to teach our young people too. Dr. Glenn, there's so many kids that have no clue about what went on there.
That's right.
And a lot of our schools have stopped teaching about Black history. You talk to them about Dr. Martin Luther King, they don't have any clue about what went on. I'm telling you, even in today's society, they were out of school, and a lot of them have no clue about what that birthday was all about.
And I have a lot of information on Black history, particularly Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, the late, great Representative Mr. John Lewis. I have a lot of documentation on a lot of things, but Jackie, I'm going to ask you if you would be so kind to email me some document or some of the things you mentioned about Dr. King, because I have been selected to do a Black history sermon, or not sermon, but speech on Black history at my church, Mount Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. That'll be on February the 5th at 10 a.m. Jackie.
Dr. Glenn, one of the interesting things that I have read here when we were looking at this particular subject to talk about Dr. King was that we found out that Dr. King's name originally was
right.
not Dr. Martin Luther King.
That's right.
And this was an interesting fact that I think that we should share with you. I know it was interesting to me that Dr. King's father, I believe, traveled all over. And that his name was Michael, I believe it was.
Michael, yeah.
So Dr. King's name at first was actually Michael, and he was a Michael Jr., but his father changed his name to Dr. Martin Luther King. And he changed his son, who was already, I think he was 5 years old when he changed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s name to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Their name was Michael at first.
But then they changed it to Martin.
They changed it to Martin because they admired the Protestant reformer leader, and they changed the name because of their admiration of Martin Luther, and so that's where they got the name from.
And Jackie, I'll let you take us out to the break in a minute, but first, I want to say, if you want to go to 8 steps that pave the way for civil rights, followed by 5 things to know, surprising facts about Martin Luther King. And then lastly, I'll play that 4-minute audio clip, or If I Had Steve's, that will end today's broadcast.
All righty. Dr. Glenn, are we ready for break?
In 1 minute, 60 seconds.
1 minute. So that was one of the 5 things that we needed to know about Dr. Martin Luther King.
Okay, that was one of the 5.
One of them was that he had changed his name, and his name did not start off as Dr. Martin Luther King.
Right, yeah, I see that here now.
They changed it on the birth certificate to reflect it in July 23rd, 1957.
All right, so when we come back from the break, we'll have 4 to do, or maybe we'll repeat that again, and then we'll go into the 8 steps that pave the way for civil rights, followed by the Dr. King, If I Had Sneezed, which is about 4 minutes in length, and that will conclude today's broadcast. Jackie, 20 seconds.
Oh, yeah. There's some surprising facts. We cannot wait till we come back after the break so we can share these things with you. We're excited. Come on back and join us.
So keep it locked right here, ladies and gentlemen, to Awesome Radio 106.9 FM WBISLP. Back in a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Stick and stay.
One.
Yeah, Council.
My name is Jayla, and you're to see to my papa, Glenn Johnson, on the radio.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for keeping it locked right here to Awesome Radio 106.9 FM WBISLP. Winterville, Aden, Grifton, Southside, Greenville, North Carolina. Christian inspiration for the family and ministry teaching for practical Christian living. I am joined with my fabulous co-host, Ms. Jacqueline Collins-Williams. I'm going to hand it over to her at this time.
Yes, we talked about some facts about Dr. King's surprising facts, and we did number one already. We told you that his name was not Dr. Martin Luther King, that it was Michael King Jr., and that his father had it changed because he was impressed by the leader Martin Luther. And so he changed his son's name, who was already 5 years old at the time, and changed his name. Can you imagine being 5 and then now your name is changed? What's in a name? There's a lot in a name. You know, he wanted a name that meant something, and he wanted it for himself, and he also went down to his son. In fact, to know that he didn't start out as Martin Luther King, he started out as Michael.
Yeah, but they're doing it all because can you imagine a 5-year-old getting your name changed? I thought my name was so-and-so and so-and-so. What are you talking about?
Yeah, how you going to convince a child at 5 that that's not their name anymore?
Right, yeah.
But I'm sure his father explained to him how, you know, and why he did that. And so I'm sure that he accepted it and received it well. And so the whole family, imagine having to tell the whole family, Dr. Glenn, that the child's name is no longer Michael, but is now Martin.
Yeah.
You know, how you going to convince other people? You know, what they're going to look at you like, what are you doing? So fact number 2 is that Dr. King entered college when he was 15 years old. This showed, you know, at an early age that that he was extraordinarily gifted, that he was a gifted individual to go into college at 15. A lot of us, you know, we can't even imagine going into college. We might have struggled getting through high school, but he was already ready for college at 15 years old. He was admitted into the Morehouse College, and he graduated in 1948. And so we're looking here. Let's go on to number 3. Dr. King was arrested 29 times. He was arrested 29 times. You know, that is something. It's something to be arrested 1, 2, 3, 4 times, but to be arrested 29 times. That is something. That is something there.
Yeah, it is.
Arrested 29 times. And this is for the things that he was marching for and different things that he was standing for. He became arrested. He was arrested 29 times. And we already talked about the assassination attempt that happened a decade before his death. But we want to tell you that after his death, the King family filed a civil case against the government and won. Number 5, his family filed a civil case and won. That is something that they did win the lawsuit. There's a lot of people, so at least his family was compensated for his death.
Yeah, and I want to mention one other thing before we get to the audio clip, because I don't know if we'll have time to go to the other document. But in 2017, when I was in audio engineering school in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church, Dr. King's original church. The original church is across the street from the new church, but in the King Center is next door to the new church. So while at the King Center, and I'm admiring all the things they have on display, and I was admiring Dr. King's mural they have there, and standing next to me was a gentleman from Bosnia that didn't speak English, so his girlfriend had to translate for him. And he said, you know, this man that we're looking at, he said, we know you guys here in the United States admire and adore him so much, but you don't know how he have helped my country, Bosnia. He said, because of Dr. King, my country is free.
Definitely, Dr. Glenn. He had an impact that was around the world.
That's right.
Everybody knows him in every nation. The African nation celebrates him. So it's not just in the United States. He is known and brought about change over the world.
Yeah, with this audio clip, it's 5 minutes in length. We have about 5 minutes remaining. So I have to cut it off at some point so we get into today's broadcast. But here is Dr. King, If I Had Sneezed, once again.
While sitting there autographing books, a demented black woman came up. The only question I heard from her was, "You Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down writing, and I said, "Yes." The next minute, I felt something beating on my chest. Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon. That blade had gone through, and the x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And once that's punctured, you're drowned in your own blood. That's the end of you. It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. They allowed me to read some of the mail that came in, and from all over the states and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I will never forget. I had received one from the president and the vice president. I've forgotten what those telegrams said. I'd received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said. But there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl, who was a student at the White Plains High School. And I looked at that letter, and I'll never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." She said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze. I want to say tonight that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960. And students all over the South started sitting in at lunch counters.
Okay, I'm going to end that audio clip right there because we have 1 minute and a half for the remainder of the broadcast. That will conclude today's broadcast on Remembering Dr. King. So I'm going to give it over to my co-host for the next minute and 15 seconds. Jackie.
We just want you to remember Dr. King and his accomplishments and how he fought for many things, how he was a leader amongst this nation and other nations, and how his fight for change and segregation and the different things, the Montgomery boycott, the Little Rock 9, the Greensboro sit-in, and the Brown versus Board of Education, to name just a few of the things that he spearheaded and had victory in. We also want you to know that this change has brought about more equality for us in the United States and for many people around the world, that his message still rings, and that, you know, his speeches are still being played all over. I have a dream, and we want to today encourage you to keep your dreams alive. Keep Dr. King's dream alive and keep your dream alive.
And don't forget the Greensboro sit-in was here in Greensboro, North Carolina. And should you like to avail yourself to any of the documents that I have, please don't hesitate to email me at glennjohnsonshow@gmail.com. That's Glenn, Glenn, johnsonshow@gmail.com. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to today's broadcast, remembering the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And thank you to our caller for calling today. Everybody have a fabulous day. God bless you all. Jackie, 10 seconds.
Come on and celebrate that holiday. Make it big. Make it like Christmas. And we bid you all to take care and tune in with us on next time, The Glenn Johnson Show.